Okay, by the end of this video, the goal is that you'll never procrastinate again. I'm going to teach you that. I'm a doctor, so this has helped me overcome my own procrastination when I was younger to get a medical degree, to be a doctor for 6 years, as well as achieve or work on other goals like running an Ironman, building a business. So here we go. In this training, we're going to talk about something that almost all people mislabel, which is procrastination. So this is what we're going to unpack. It's the idea that what you think is procrastination is often something very different. So I'll tell you exactly that. And misunderstanding this leads people to apply solutions that never actually fix the problem. So here's what we're going to cover today. We'll start with the common belief about what procrastination is, why it feels accurate on the surface. Then we'll break down what's exactly happening at a cognitive level when you can't start, and why that experience feels like resistance. From there, we'll move into the underlying mechanism that creates the state. And finally, we'll build a practical way to remove that friction so starting becomes natural again. So that's the whole purpose of this. Let's get into it. Before we start, if you want this training along with the deeper frameworks that I talk about, you can join the free community in the link. Okay, with that said, let's get into it. So the assumption most people think of when they think of procrastination is that it becomes from a lack of discipline, and I used to think this as well once I really struggled with procrastination, studying for exams. I used to think I was just lazy, and that was never the problem. And if you're watching this, you're probably not lazy, you're probably a high performer, yet you still criticize yourself for this lack of discipline. You tell yourself you're avoiding work because you don't feel like doing it, or because you're choosing comfort over effort. You're really hard on yourself for choosing these like shorter spikes of dopamine, entertainment, distraction, okay? You're choosing comfort over effort. And that explanation feels convincing because it's very simple. You've probably heard it a lot before. The thing is, it's too simple. It doesn't really tell the whole story. You sit down to work, you hesitate, you switch to something easier, and it looks to you like avoidance. You're not choosing the hard thing. But when you actually examine this experience more closely, something doesn't quite add up. There are moments when you can work for hours without friction. You probably experienced that. You can sit down and really tap into a really focused mode. You've been there before, so why can't you do this consistently? So it's got to be something more than just being lazy or not motivated, because you've demonstrated before that you can actually be very motivated, very hardworking. So it's got to be something different. If discipline was the core issue, then inconsistency would be harder to explain, essentially. So the more useful question becomes what changes between those states. So the times when you're really focused, you're enjoying it, you're really working hard, and then the times where you feel a bit lazier, you really struggle to get into hard work. What's the difference? Here's what we need to look at, and that's cognitive load. Okay, what do I mean by cognitive load? It's your brain can only actively manage a limited number of variables at once. You're probably familiar with this. These variables include tasks that you need to complete, decisions you haven't yet made, your kind of ongoing to-do list. This is all in your brain, this is all in the background. These are all ideas you're holding on to and things you're trying not to forget. Your brain is still storing them because there are a lot of open loops, and that's what cognitive load is. When that number stays within a manageable range, like 1 or 2 things, thinking feels quite clear and action feels straightforward, simple, clear. But when that number exceeds that range, then you're kind of holding on to a lot more things. It's weighing you down, you're distracted, your attention is scattered. Clarity turns into noise, direction turns into hesitation. You never really know where to begin, and starting begins to feel heavier than it logically should. That heaviness is what most people call procrastination. What you're actually experiencing is this overload feeling, this cognitive overload. Now this connects to something deeper. Let me talk about this. Your brain is constantly trying to regulate effort. So when it detects that a task is unclear or complex or mentally taxing or expensive, it increases resistance as a way to delay engagement. This is not a conscious decision, it's a protective mechanism designed to prevent inefficient use of energy. What do I mean by that? Well, if there's a really complicated, complex task, your brain isn't going to naturally want to do that if there's no clear way of just getting it done. Instead, it's going to just avoid that, focus on other things, procrastinate, because it kind of labels that as something that's really going to require a lot of work, that's not going to be efficient, it's not going to get to your actual goal. So it'll probably just lead to this procrastination feeling. And that's just because it's trying to be efficient in energy use. So when you sit down to work while holding multiple unresolved thoughts in your head, your brain doesn't see a clear path forward. It sees ambiguity, complexity, and that increases the perceived cost of action. This is where dopamine comes into play as well, in a more subtle way. Dopamine influences how attractive a task appears relative to other tasks. So when your system is already strained by overload, low friction, high stimulation activities that are really easy to do, these become more appealing, not because they're more meaningful, but because they require less cognitive effort, and they give you these higher initial spikes of dopamine. So the moment you feel resistance, your attention is pulled towards something easier, basically the path of least resistance. You're probably familiar with this term. If something is easier to do, more fun to do, then your brain's going to naturally just want to do that. And that can look like, being addicted to your phone, social media, etc. Without even consciously choosing it, your brain just gravitates towards these easier tasks. So yeah, it can look like checking something, switching context, engaging in a task that has a clear beginning and end, just like a small micro task. You might be constantly doing these small tasks, not because they're the most fulfilling or the things that will move you forward, but because they're the easiest, they're the clearest, and they're the simplest, but they might not necessarily be the right things you should be focusing on. So over time, this creates a loop. You feel overloaded, you switch to something easier each time. That switching adds more fragmentation. So fragmentation is when you're not clearly defined on one specific thing. You have multiple things. You keep context and task switching. And this increases overload. And the next time you try to start, the resistance is even stronger. So that thing that you should be doing, it kind of, each time you get back to that, there's more and more resistance. And that kind of disguises itself as this procrastination. So as we move to the next section, the goal is to break that loop. How do we do that? And that's by reducing the load your brain is carrying in the first place. And we call this first step externalization. Everything that is currently sitting in your head as an open loop needs to be moved out of your mind and to a different storage system. So this is a way you can free up your mind, decrease the amount of load, and stop feeling overwhelmed. Okay? So this could include tasks, ideas, decisions, and anything that feels unfinished, any open loops at all. So when you do this, you're not solving everything immediately, you're reducing the number of active variables your brain is trying to hold on at any one time. Second step then is compression. So if fragmentation is doing too many things, having too many open loops, then compression is the opposite of that. So you're compressing your focus and your attention to as narrow a window as possible. That's what focus essentially is. So instead of trying to move everything forward, you define what actually matters for your current day or season or session. This is where most people make a mistake because they treat all tasks as equally urgent, which keeps the system overloaded. So it's kind of about prioritization. What is that one task that you want to focus on first? And then that's where your attention goes. When you narrow your focus to a small number of priorities, your brain has a clearer path, and that clarity reduces resistance. The third step then is sequencing. You decide in advance what you're going to work on first, and you remove the need to make the decision in the moment. So this reduces your decision fatigue, because decision making itself consumes energy, and when your system is already strained, even small decisions add this friction. So here's where it gets interesting. When you reduce that cognitive load, starting stops feeling like a battle. Your resistance is really reduced, and it's not because you forced yourself to act, it's not because you become more disciplined or using more willpower, but because the conditions that created resistance are no longer present. You've actually just removed that. So as we move into the final part, let's talk about how this becomes sustainable for the long term, how we can develop this into a habit and consistency going forward. So you build a rhythm where your brain is not constantly carrying unresolved information. At the end of each day, you externalize what's left open. You write down all of your thoughts, ideas, open loops essentially, onto a piece of paper or a Notion template. Just get it out in some sort of journal, writing. Externalize it basically. At the start of the next day, you also define a small number of priorities. What are the things you want to focus on? And a small number, so I mean 1, 2, or 3 things. And during work, you stay within that structure. And so I guess discipline is important, but not in the way you probably thought. It's not about working more, longer, or being busier. It's actually just being disciplined in saying no and narrowing that focus. And over time, your baseline changes. You spend less time in a state of overload. You have less cognitive load. And this means less time experiencing this constant decision making, this task switching, and also experiencing resistance, which means you need less discipline and you just naturally start to engage in the narrower, more focused, more important tasks. So to bring this together, what you have been calling procrastination, probably before this video, hopefully you've had a better understanding of that, because it actually might often be a signal. Not that you're unwilling to work, but that your system is carrying more than it can process efficiently. And the shift that follows is important. Instead of seeing yourself as someone who struggles with discipline, with procrastination, instead you start seeing yourself as someone who manages cognitive load in a way that allows action to happen naturally. That's a very different problem to solve. So I think being very clear on the problem will lead to a very clear solution. So if this resonated with you, if you got value from this video, then very soon we're going to look at how your environment amplifies or reduces this overload. So how we can set up your environment. Again, it's not about using that crazy amount of willpower to cultivate this perfect focus, but how we can optimize our environment so it happens naturally. So I'll talk about that in the next video. So make sure to subscribe and we can get into that one. But yeah, that's all I wanted to say. Let's see you on the next one.